Thank you very much, and no worries on the last name pronunciation. Sometimes I mix it up too. Okay, so what I'm going to present to you today is a mixture of information, mostly from the National Coffee Drinking Trends study from the NCA, but I do have some other additional data sources splashed in. But again, we're going to break off and talk mostly about coffee drinking trends in the United States. And there's some interesting things going on, so hopefully you'll find some value here. First and foremost, just to describe how the NCA captures their data. They do an online survey, predominantly in January. It's usually always done in January. Just about less than 3,000 respondents, always age 18 and older, and distribution across the demographics. They have started conducting the survey in both English and Spanish to account for the growing Hispanic population in the U.S., so a pretty good representation. So let's get into it. First and foremost, a little quiz. I mean, who do you think, or what do you think is the most popular beverage in the United States? Is it coffee, tap water, or soft drinks? Any guesses there? And people would think soft drinks, right? It happens to be coffee. In totality, coffee, and that includes everything from traditional brewed coffee all the way through espresso-based beverages, 59% of the population report drinking that on a past day basis. Tap water's behind that by about 10 points at 49%. Soda is at 39%. And if I had asked you this question 10 years ago, you would have been absolutely correct to say soft drinks. Soft drink consumption in the U.S. has declined significantly over the past, actually it's been going on for 20 years. So some interesting trends going on there. But definitely coffee is the most relevant. And here you can see the breakdown for just about everything: coffee, bottled water, tap water, tea, soda, so on and so forth. The one to pay attention to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is the sports drinks and energy drinks. At only 14%, it still seems somewhat low. However, if we look at it by age, you'll see it's an increasingly important category for what we term the millennials or younger consumers in the U.S., and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's relevant. So the benefit that the NCA does with this study is the fact that it's longitudinal, right? We've got 50 plus years of data going back all the way to 1954 that we can analyze and mine. And so you could see how coffee drinking in the U.S. has changed over that time period, over that 50 plus years. Starting off with daily consumption being around almost 80% back in the 50s, we saw significant declines all the way through into the 90s, and then we started to see the numbers start to stack back up again, kind of coinciding with the birth of the gourmet coffee revolution in the U.S. Yep, Starbucks drove that, but a number of other players came in as well, and now we're seeing a few slight changes here and there in the recent years, and we'll dig into those a little bit. But overall, consumption seems stable, right? So this is percent reporting past week consumption, so sometime in the past 7 days. If they've had some type of coffee or gourmet coffee beverage, you can see it's hanging around in the low 70s. If we take a longer view, we look at past year consumption, again, fairly stable. We have seen it go as high as the low to mid 80s. Right now we're just below that in the high 70s. So again, we've seen a little bit of a fall off, especially in the most recent years, but it's still a significant beverage, and it's still kind of holding at these levels. So percent drinking yesterday, we'll take a look at it in terms of what we're drinking, so traditional coffee versus gourmet coffee beverages. So as I said, we've seen some fall off in the past couple of years in terms of traditional coffee consumption, but gourmet coffee beverages since about 2012, top 30%. So we have seen some growth there. We're going to follow these trends a little bit more tightly, obviously, to see if we're going to see a little bit more of that fall off. One of the things that I think is going to be important for us to keep in mind is the definition of traditional coffee versus gourmet coffee. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because we call it gourmet traditional coffee, which is essentially traditional coffee brewed with premium quality beans. That definition in the consumer's mind, I think, is blurring, right? So what the consumer considers to be gourmet, they might not consider it gourmet anymore. They might think it's just traditional coffee, right? So even if it is 100% Arabica, high-grown Costa Rican, consumers may still consider that traditional coffee. So we're going to have to find different ways to flesh out exactly what that means going forward. So percent drinking yesterday, this is the difference between hot and iced coffee or cold coffee. We expect these numbers to change significantly. One of the differences or issues with the research that we'll try and pan out in future studies is the fact that the survey is conducted in January of every year, and the majority of the United States in January is cold. So obviously you're going to have a predominance for hot beverages. If we did conduct a study in the summer months, we would assume that these numbers would be higher. Plus, there's a new trend in the U.S. for cold brewed coffee. A lot of the major restaurant chains are pushing that. There's a number of suppliers that are selling cold brewed coffee. So we expect to see this number rise across the year, not just in the summer months. So we'll obviously keep our eyes on that. Definitely a trend in the U.S. Number of cups consumed. This number hasn't changed significantly in a long time, right? 3.2 cups per day for consumers. We've seen differences in what they're drinking and the size of the cup of the coffee that they're drinking, but for the most part, it's averaging around 3 cups a day. And here's the size of cup slide. So you can see predominant focus on small to medium size. Small would be more of the traditional coffee cup size, the 8-ounce cup. But I actually think that this is the trend that we're seeing growth in. I don't believe we've asked this question consistently over the past several years, so we can't really trend it all that well. But we probably will going forward. And I would expect to see these numbers either be stable or somewhat grow. If you've been to the United States, you know that 16-ounce cup in a lot of places is the medium. The Starbucks top size is the Venti, which is 20 ounces. So again, I suspect that we'll see these numbers either grow or at least be stable. But for the most part, people are drinking larger cups of coffee, 12 ounces or more. So let's talk a little bit about what the coffee drinker looks like, and we're going to dig into some of these trends. So 18 to 24-year-olds, and this is the trend slide. You can see we had a little bit of fall off, not statistically significant, but so we'll call that stable. These are the 25 to 39-year-olds, fairly stable. 40 to 59-year-olds, pretty much no change over the past. The 60-plus crowd is really where we're starting to see some interesting trends. Just in this past couple of years, we saw a decline in their consumption. So my contention would be is that there's a couple of forces at work. Number one, each age cohort brings with them a certain amount of their coffee drinking habits as they age, right? So as we know, younger consumers are less likely to drink coffee overall. That's been the case for a long time. As they age, they do pick up some of their previous cohorts or previous generations' coffee consumption habits, but I think they bring with them some also of their other consumption habits. So I think we're going to eventually sandwich out to these numbers overall, which it certainly seems to be the case here as we've moved into the 65% crowd for the 60-plus age group. However, the age profile is different when we look at the different coffee types, as you can understand. So I think the challenge for the industry in the U.S. is going to be to engage younger generations earlier with coffee. So you can see for total coffee, it's definitely skews to the older age groups, right? 65% of 60-plus consumers drink coffee. And you can see what that looks like for younger consumers. And it's even more evident when you look at traditional coffee, especially traditional coffee, non-gourmet. The gap is much larger, 48 to 16. Instant, relatively stable across the age groups. Decaf shows a slight increase for the 60-plus crowd, but definitely some opportunities there. It's low penetration, so I think there's some way that we can look to move that number up. Gourmet coffee is where we start to see a differential, the difference, right? So younger consumers are more in tune with gourmet coffee, especially espresso-based coffee beverages, right? So your cappuccinos and lattes definitely skew a little bit more in favor of the younger consumer. Traditional coffee considered to be gourmet, again, brewed from premium quality beans, skews a little bit more for that middle demographic, right? Not just the millennials, but Generation X, somewhere in between the 25 to 59-year-old group. So different groups tend to drink coffee at different times. So another opportunity for us to look at being able to manipulate, or not manipulate, but to grow coffee consumption. Breakfast or early morning coffee consumption definitely skews for older generations. Morning, we'll call that non-breakfast occasion coffee, skews a little bit more towards the 35 to 54 group, right? So primarily working age adults are the ones who are drinking coffee in the morning. At a higher percentage, I should say. So that makes total sense as they're out and about and working. So they're looking for a boost for coffee in the morning. And then last but not least is the afternoon, which presents a good opportunity to bring in new customers, especially younger consumers, as they do tend to drink it a little bit more than older consumers. As a snack, so that's something else to look at as an opportunity. And so what I wanted to do is I'm going to shift gears for you a little bit, is figure out how do we engage with younger consumers. And so I'm going to present to you some information from some work that Data Central does in our restaurant industry tracking trends. What we do, and I'm going to give you a long explanation, it's going to be a short payoff, but it'll be poignant, I promise you that. What we do is we track all the new items and limited time offers that the big restaurant chains in the U.S. launch. And if you really want to get a good handle on American food consumption, take a look at what the big chains have on their menu. And I'm talking about places like McDonald's and Burger King and Applebee's and Chili's and all those types of chains. These are some of the new items that we've tracked over the past year. What we do is we go out and we test these items with consumers in terms of their concept, right? So we ask them if they'd be willing to purchase these items. So we get normative scores, and for a lot of these items, so this number means at Friendly's they have a beverage called the Sour Patch Splash. It scored 80 in the 88th percentile, which means it scored better than 88% of the items that we have in the database among millennials, right? So millennials are that younger age group, 18 to 34. When we look at that item based on what everybody else scored it as, you can see there's a significant gap. So what this chart is showing is all of the items, the top 20 items with the biggest gap for millennials. So these are the items that millennials like more than anybody else. And so here's the percent or the point gap for those items. So long explanation, here's the payoff, right? So it's the largest gap. 16 of the top 20 items are beverages. So there are some coffee beverages in there, but not a lot. So when we talk about trying to engage a younger audience, and that's going to be crucial to growing coffee consumption in the U.S., we really have to understand what is in the mix and what that younger generation is looking for. And right now you can see in terms of all restaurant types of new items, they're looking for beverages a lot. All 20 of them are sweet. So that's the other key, right? So millennials are looking for new and interesting items. They're drinking lots of different kinds of beverages. So coffee is just one item in the mix. How can we make it more appealing to break through the noise, if you will? And a good way to do that is make sure that we sweeten it up. because it's not just the beverages that are sweet for millennials, it's a lot of the different things that are appealing to them. So we need to be able to make sure that we can appeal to that as well. So a quick little diversion there. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So now we'll go back into the NCA data and talk about the different types of beverages, how they're made. So we'll talk about additives. For the American coffee consumer, 41% add some type of whitening agent, whether it's cream or milk, and sweetener, right? And again, the sweetener can be sugar or some type of artificial sweetener. 22% drink their coffee black. So we'll break it down a little bit more. In terms of whitening, you can see across the age groups, fairly consistent, a little bit lower in the 65 plus crowd, and we'll see why that is, but for the most part, we're somewhere around 60% of people putting some type of cream or milk in their coffee. For sweetener, definitely skews a little bit younger. So a little bit, 64% of the 18 to 24-year-olds are adding some type of sweetener into their coffee, much lower for the 65 plus crowd. And then the percentage of folks who drink it black. And this is interesting, because I've been working with the NCA for 15 years now, I believe, and following these trends consistently over that time. There was a time when we saw an increase in the number of people who drank their coffee black. That has changed. So it's interesting that we're only seeing that 22% say they're drinking their coffee black, and it does skew older, but like I said before, I think we're seeing that shift as people age into the different age groups. They're carrying with them more of their consumption habits, and that means that they're going to increase in the usage of sweeteners and creamers. Flavored coffee is also something that is trending, although still in the minority, right? So 78% drink their coffee unflavored, 30% drink flavored coffee. The numbers add up to more than 100 because people drink more than 1 cup a day, and sometimes, for 1 cup, maybe the afternoon cup, they might drink a flavored coffee, but their morning coffee might be unflavored. So this is the percentage breakout here. Flavored coffee is still somewhat important at roughly 30%. When they're purchasing coffee for home consumption, these are the formats, predominantly pre-ground, right? So that's still a majority of the market when you're looking at packaged coffee that consumers purchase to bring home. 83% have already ground. I believe you'll be getting a copy of this presentation, so you can take pictures, but I think you'll be able to have a copy of it as well. Where and when coffee is consumed, 81% drink coffee at home, 35% drink it out of home. So again, numbers add up to more than 100 for multiple occasions, but still at home dominates 81%. So we'll dig into that a little bit. In terms of where people consume, so here's your at-home, 81%. You can see that's trending stable, same number of people. And we'll look at what it looks like at home in a little bit. Out of home, we saw a little bit of growth a couple of years ago, and it's stabilized as well. An increase in at-work coffee, which is interesting, and then the eating place, which is some type of restaurant. We saw a little bit of an increase there. And then traveling and commuting, pretty stable. So who prepares coffee at home definitely skews older. In terms of 65 plus, you see that 93% of those consumers prepare coffee at home versus only 67% for the younger consumers. Who's purchasing out of home is the exact opposite, right? So younger consumers are much more likely than the older cohorts to drink coffee prepared away from home. So again, it's some type of coffee shop, convenience store, or restaurant. So I'm going to bring in some additional data here again. This is from a coffee tracking service that we call Buzz that Data Central produces. We've got a much more robust sample in this database because we like to dig into those away from home trends a little bit more deeply than what the NCA can capture at this point. So we look at all these different areas where people obtain coffee away from home. And as I like to say, you've got the big four up here. It's a little bit hard to read, but that third line in the blue, or the fourth line in the blue is C-stores, convenience stores. Those four make up the majority of coffee consumption. Coffee shops, donut shops, QSRs are quick service restaurants like McDonald's or Burger King. Definitely a large share of the away from home coffee market. And then convenience stores, so AM, PM, 7-Eleven. If you guys have been to the States, I highly recommend going to Philadelphia and checking out Wawa. If you've been, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's a completely interesting coffee experience. You have to go to a Wawa at 6 o'clock in the morning. It'll knock you out how busy it is, and how many people are in there making their coffee beverages. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But all the other places that people obtain coffee are relatively small, except for that at-work number, right? Which makes sense, especially in areas of business and industry where you have factories or office space. Coffee consumption is pretty high. So those are the top locations that people get their coffee away from home. And here's some of the reasons why they visit each of those locations. Again, a little bit of an eye chart, but I'll just kind of hit some of the highlights. In terms of quality of coffee, coffee shops kind of own the day, right? Best quality, environment and ambiance, best variety are all areas that the coffee shop, like Starbucks, Peet's, or one of the other top purveyors, will always outperform. In terms of convenience, though, obviously QSRs and convenience stores, just by the sheer number of locations, will own those metrics, right? So for convenience, there's nothing easier in the United States than hitting the drive-thru at McDonald's to pick up a cup of coffee. It's fast. You don't have to get out of your car. And likewise for convenience stores, there's so many of them. They've got prime real estate in terms of the corner spaces, so it's easier for people to do that. What C-stores do, though, above and beyond most everybody else, is the ability to customize. And they even beat out coffee shops on that measure. And so convenience stores have really upped the game in terms of providing different types of additives, sweeteners, creamers, flavor options, even things like whipped cream, toppers, cinnamon and nutmeg, even little marshmallows for your hot chocolate. You can do just about anything with your coffee beverage at convenience stores. So they win out in terms of the ability to customize. And the consumers who go to that channel for their coffee are very loyal because they like to make their cup exactly the way they want, and they can't get that for the most part at many of the other venues. So again, a little bit more insight into the American coffee market, not to mention the fact that, and I know we didn't have it in here in terms of beverage size, but 16 ounces, 20 ounces, sometimes larger than 20. You'll see that, especially in the convenience store sector. You'll see people walking out with to-go cups that look like they're small kegs. So it's an interesting market. And to give you a little bit more context, too, about what's happening in the United States in terms of quality, you could see that just by looking at the restaurant industry overall. So anybody familiar with this location, this is a Panera Bread facility. So this is their coffee bar. This is what we would call a fast casual restaurant. So even the quick service industry is changing, moving away from that traditional McDonald's type look to something a little bit more upscale. Anyone know what this one is? Even the convenience store sector is changing in the U.S., and we're seeing an increase in their quality image, right? So this is the 7-Eleven in Chicago that really kind of went out of their way to make things look that much better. And then last but not least, I'll show you from an industry perspective. This is the website for a restaurant chain called Chick-fil-A. So they're based in the South. They sell chicken sandwiches. They're good fried chicken sandwiches. They sell a heck of a lot of them. And so they're not necessarily known as a breakfast place, but they serve breakfast. But they went out of their way to boost their coffee program. So they call it Coffee with a Story. They feature the farmers, and they talk about what makes their coffees so special. So again, the entire industry in the U.S. is looking to kind of increase their image, increase the quality perception across all different types. Just a quick slide on when coffee is consumed. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to start going faster because I want to talk about brewing methods. Still predominantly drip brewers in the U.S. However, single cup brewers are also important. Instant at 13%, and then espresso machines at 9%. So a single cup brewer, 27% of the population in the U.S. owns a single cup brewer. That's relatively stable, especially across the age groups. So really not a difference by age for single cup brewer ownership. It's mostly income, right? So it's households with higher annual incomes are more likely to own a single cup brewer. Owners do tend to drink a little bit more coffee than everybody else. So if you own a single cup brewer, you're more likely to drink coffee at a higher rate. And you can see that though the number of cups, relatively similar, 3.3. So 43% of single cup brewer owners have owned their system for less than a year. And you can see how that plays out. Only 23% have had it for longer than that, so it's still relatively new. Consumption doesn't necessarily decrease. It shows it's a little bit down, but that's statistically not significant, so it's pretty much the same. The majority of people who own a single cup brewer, I just jumped to this statistic over here, 50%, they make 50% of their coffee with that single cup brewer when they brew coffee at home. So they are using still other brew methods for their coffee, so that's something else to consider for folks who are supplying that industry. Most are drinking traditional coffee or flavored coffee. Hot chocolate is also up there. These are all the things that single cup brewers, companies promote that their brewers can make, but people are not as familiar with that, so they're not using it in that way. Single cup brewers are the preferred method for workplace coffee by a small amount, but still preferred. So single cup brewer provides convenience and variety for consumers at work, and so that's why they prefer it. And then here's some of the quick attributes for single cup brewers that are important. So wide variety, convenience are the top vote getters. Interestingly enough, these are the percentage of folks who agree with these statements. You could see on the flip side, the lower percentages are for good value, so it is more expensive, and it's understood, it's perceived that way as being more expensive. Not as good for the environment, better tasting, reasonably priced. So again, these are some of the factors that if you're working in the single cup brewer industry could potentially offer up some roadblocks. Quickly on cause-related coffee, these are people who currently purchase cause-related coffees, 25% organic, 18% fair trade, and 16% Rainforest Alliance. There's a quick little chart here to kind of show you what the different associations have, what's meaningful for those. So organic is more associated with health, fair trade more associated with justice, and the ones in the middle are seen kind of in the middle, people are less familiar. So that's pretty much all I had today. There's some, again, you'll get a copy of this. There's some information about some of the data that we talked about, but for the most part, that's it. Let me know if you have any questions.